it's not just necessary for a contract like the one we're discussing this evening to be done between the therapist and the patient, but it's also something that you can put in place between yourself and your loved one. And I think that's why it's so important for us to educate you on that this evening, so that it's a discussion that you can have with your loved one, but it's also often something that you can put in paper. I personally like to have one on paper. I like to refer to it as a sustainable recovery contract or a relapse prevention contract, because it's an agreement between various parties. So the first thing that I want us to focus on is, and we kind of touched on that when we spoke about the definition of relapse prevention, and that's that there is a difference between being clean and being in recovery, or being clean and being in sobriety or having sobriety. So being clean is simply just not picking up, not using a substance. And being in recovery, or having sobriety is a lot more comprehensive than that. So that entails a complete lifestyle change. In the recovery circles, we have a term that we refer to as the dry drunk syndrome, or the relapse syndrome, or white knuckling. And what that refers to is really that when we take the substances away, or when we take the alcohol away, or when we take the process addictions such as gambling or sex and porn away, but nothing else in the person's life changes. So there's still the deceit, there's still the manipulation, there's still the anxiety, there's still the chaos. That is referred to as that relapse syndrome, or the white knuckling. And the theory around that is that if nothing changes apart from the addiction being taken away, life becomes so bad that the person kind of feels like they're going crazy, or they feel like, this life isn't really worth it. I might as well use, or I might as well die. And that's why it is so important that, along with putting down the substances or putting away the addiction, there's also a whole lot of lifestyle changes that come with it. And part of the relapse prevention contract needs to include some of those lifestyle changes. The next one that we need to have a look at is that every plan needs to be individualized. So just as treatment for everyone is individualized, so does the relapse prevention contract need to be individualized. There are some universal factors that need to be taken into consideration, and some universal elements. But there are also very individual triggers, individual circumstances and situations that need to be taken into consideration. So the next one as well is that it's a living contract. So when we speak about a living contract, we're referring to the fact that it is a contract that continuously needs to be assessed and modified as the person develops during the recovery process, but also as situations and circumstances change. And we're going to have a look a little bit later on at when and how that works. The other one that I want to touch on is accountability versus control. And I think this is a really, really important one. So when it comes to relapse prevention and the role that you as a loved one play, I think it's really important to remember that the purpose of this relapse prevention is for your loved one to be accountable. It's not about you controlling. And I always like to remind everyone about the 3 C's of addiction. We say that it's nobody caused it, nobody can cure it, and nobody can control it. And even in this situation, nobody can control it. So for me, when I think about control, I often think about like micromanaging. You trying to micromanage your loved one's life or your loved one's recovery process. And that's just going to cause you a whole lot of frustration, and it's going to cause them a whole lot of frustration. So it shouldn't be that. It should rather be a case of them being accountable. So for me, it's about being transparent. What things are we going to put in place so they can be accountable and their life can be transparent, and so that they're in a position where, if need be, they can easily supply us with answers or explanations, right? Nothing is in the dark and secretive as it used to be in active addiction. And then the last one is just that these, even though if we put it on paper or if it's something that's discussed, these are the minimum requirements, right? So if we say, these are the things that I expect you to do in the house, you need to wash the dishes, you need to do the laundry, etc., etc., it doesn't mean because we didn't stipulate that you should make your bed, that it means you don't have to make your bed. It's a very, very simple explanation, but yeah, it's about the spirit of the contract. So these are the absolute minimum requirements. Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, so firstly, when it comes to relapse prevention planning, we need to have a look at the triggers. And as I mentioned earlier, we need to look at the individual triggers. Again, there are some universal factors that we need to take into consideration, but there are also individual situations and circumstances that we need to consider. So when we speak about triggers, generally we divide them into two major categories: internal triggers, which has a lot more to do with things that happen inside of us, memories, feelings, etc. And then when it comes to relapse prevention planning, I think the external triggers play a bigger part, and those are the elements that you can see on your screen. Sorry, people, places, and things. So a lot of these, we either need to manage them, or in a lot of situations, we need to completely avoid them. So if I can just touch on people, for instance, universal ones are drug dealers. Generally, that's a no-go. Everyone needs to avoid drug dealers, right? They're associated with our addiction. They don't contribute in any positive way to our lives. They generally, across the board, need to be avoided. Where sometimes it becomes a bit more tricky is another concept that we do teach your loved ones in treatment is anyone associated with their addiction, people that they used to use within the past, are also people that they need to exclude from their lives. It's people that they need to move on with. They need to break communication with those people. But in some situations, you would have, for instance, people, a gentleman that is in treatment and he used to use with his ex-partner, but he also has a child with that ex-partner. In that situation, it becomes a bit more tricky, right? They can't just completely write that person off because they need to co-parent in some way with that person. So, and that's what I'm saying with individual, the concept of being individual, or kind of individualizing the plan comes into place. So we need to have a look at people's specific circumstances and situations. Again, it's a possible trigger for that person. We can't exclude them from their life. How are we going to manage that? Is that going to be that contact always needs to be with a third party present? Is that third party going to be family members? Is that third party going to be a legal representative, etc., etc.? But that's exactly where the relapse prevention plan comes into place. Places generally is any place that we used to use at, any place that is associated with a culture of addiction: pubs, clubs, bars, maybe music events, sporting events. Again, not for all of us sporting events is a trigger, but for some of us, sporting events would maybe a big part of our addiction, and again needs to be avoided. When it comes to things, in that situation, it's often paraphernalia that needs to be avoided. For some of us, it might be certain clothing items. You might find that when your loved ones started drinking excessively or started using, the way that they dressed started to change, and that again started tying in a lot to their culture of addiction. So those things might be closely related to their addiction, and those things need to change too. So it's important to identify what their triggers are and how we're going to manage that. Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, so the first thing we need to cover in the relapse prevention contract, or just in the agreement, is the circle of support. So who is going to be part of this circle of support? And I think it's really important to establish some sort of support network, and that is crucial in maintaining sobriety and maintaining recovery. And this circle of support can be family, it can be friends, it can be support groups, it can be the fellowship, it can be a sponsor, and it can even be the counselor or the therapist. this circle of support is also going to be vital in establishing this relapse prevention contract, but they are also going to be the people who are going to be the ones that are going to determine when we can alter some of these agreements that we've put into place. So earlier I referred to it as being a living contract, something that we can go through on a regular basis, something we can alter on a regular basis. But again, it needs to be done not just based on what your loved one is saying, but with the input of the support network. So, for instance, if we have in the relapse prevention contract that your loved one needs to do 90 meetings in 90 days, and that's the agreement, that's what everyone's agreed to, and your loved one finds work, plus they have additional commitments that are all of a sudden unexpected and they're really finding it difficult to commit to the 90 meetings, then it's something he can discuss with the support network and say, I'm really finding it difficult. The support network can come together and say, okay, great. I think his suggestion of not doing 90, but maybe doing 4 or 5 meetings a week is reasonable. We can amend the relapse prevention contract. So the circle of support is not only going to be there to provide the support and to understand and to be the accountability, but they're also going to be the people who are going to be involved in the amendment of the relapse prevention contract. Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, so one of the first important ones that we touch on after we've established who the support system is abstinence. So we teach complete abstinence. So regardless of what the patient's drug of choice is, complete abstinence is paramount in order to maintain lasting sobriety and recovery. Often we have patients or even family members say to us, but my loved one was addicted to crystal meth. Does that mean they can never drink alcohol again? Yes, it does mean they can never drink alcohol again. My loved one was addicted to cocaine. Does that mean they can't smoke weed again? Yes, it's exactly what it means. So complete abstinence means no mind or mood altering substances. And there's even certain medications that your loved ones are not allowed to consume. Those medications in particular are benzodiazepines, codeine, ephedrine, alcohol, and CBD. So benzodiazepines are generally not medication that you can just get over the counter. It's medication that needs to be prescribed, mostly for psychiatric conditions, anxiety, sleeping disorders, etc. The other ones are a lot more easily obtainable over the counter. Codeine, for instance, is often found in pain medication. Medications such as Miprodol, Adcodol, Sinutab, Sinuleave, various ones. Some of the Nurophens also have codeine. So those are ones that you particularly need to look out for. Even some of your cough mixtures contain codeine. Ephedrine is a medication that it used to be found in a lot of diet medication. I don't think it's found that much anymore, but it is often found in flu medication. And alcohol is often found in cough mixtures as well. So it is really, really important to inform all medical professionals, whether it be doctors, dentists, specialists, whether you're going in for surgery, for your loved one or for yourself, to inform them that you are a recovering addict or that your loved one is a recovering addict and that they cannot have certain substances. I do just want to highlight the last point there where I said that it is still their own responsibility. And I know it seems strange, but so often we do still have it where people will tell a medical person that they are a recovering addict and they can't have codeine, and they still walk out of the doctor's room with a script for Miprodol. So at the end of the day, it is still their responsibility when they get to the pharmacy to say to the pharmacist as well, I cannot have certain substances. Please make sure it doesn't contain it. And even once that has been dispensed, to check the ingredients on the box to make sure that none of it contains those that medication. We always say to the patients as well that they're more than welcome to reach out to us, send us a photo of the medication, and we happy to say yes or no, please stay away from this. So it is something we see quite often. Something that I often say to my patients is it's a great idea to just get kind of rid of all of those medications in your home. Or, you know, if you have certain family that has to take some of those medications, just put them in a safe place, but kind of have a go-to box for your loved one, where they have their flu medication that they can take, they have their pain medication that they can take. So there's not that temptation. There's no excuse like, oh, but I had a headache, I just took something that I saw. It's not okay. Again, it's their own responsibility. The other one that I just want to touch on is when it comes to beverages and to food items that contain alcohol. Again, unfortunately, it's not an option. There is the theory that a lot of times the alcohol does cook out. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but it still has the flavor of it. I actually had a discussion with some of the patients today, and they're like, oh, wow, but a steak, you know, with a red wine sauce, it's absolutely divine. Yes, given it is absolutely divine, but there's also a lot of food that's also great and that can also be consumed. So often we get stuck in the things that we can't do, but there's still so much that we can do. And then just the last one before we move on to the next slide is the concept of non-alcoholic beverages. Non-alcoholic beverages is also a no-go. Interesting fact is if you look at the front of the bottle, they say 0.0% alcohol, but if you look at the back, they say 0.03 or 0.02% alcohol. So they do still have alcohol in it. They do still contain alcohol. So non-alcoholic beverages aren't exactly non-alcoholic, and they're also not an option. Right, the next one is medication and treatment adherence. So for a lot of the patients that leave our facility, whether it be primary care, secondary care, halfway house, they have consulted with our psychiatrists in most instances, and they have been prescribed certain medication, and it is of absolute importance that they continue with that medication and with the treatment that has been prescribed. It is also important that they continue to see the psychiatrist on a regular basis. If they decide not to continue with our psychiatrist, it is well within their right to not do so. But we also do advise that people do not jump around between doctors and that they only have one doctor. We've often found that when people have 2, 3, 4 different doctors, that's when they split, that's when they manipulate for different medications, and that's not healthy. It's best to have one prescribing doctor who knows of all the conditions and who's treating you collectively. So yeah, it's important, like I said, to continue with the medication, but to also continue with the regular follow-ups. Unfortunately, it is one of those warning signs and triggers that we have seen in the past, that when people leave, they're feeling so much better, they're thinking so much clearer, and because of that, they feel that there's no need to continue with the treatment and with the medication, but it's exactly the medication and the treatment that's making them feel better. So because of that, there's then often that lapse in behavior in their other dual diagnosis, and that often leads back to the addiction. Thank you, Cheryl. Right, so the next one is testing. So testing, I think in the past has sometimes been one of those little sensitive things. Should we test them? Shouldn't we test them? But if we test them, they might be offended. So testing is not about trust. When you say to your loved one you want to test them, it should be a regular thing in your home. It's not about trust. There shouldn't be the response of, why don't you trust me? What have I done? I'm tired of being treated like a child. None of that. It should be something that's agreed upon and that's done on a regular basis. Me personally, I think once a week is a healthy amount of time for a person to be tested. We also do recommend that testing gets done randomly. So it shouldn't be every week on a Monday. Addicts are quite calculating and can be quite manipulative. So if they know they're going to be tested every Monday, they know I need to stay clean up until Monday, then I can use, this is how long it's going to take for the substances to be out of my system, etc., etc. So it needs to be random once a week. It's important, I think, to discuss who is going to be doing the testing. Often we do recommend that it's gender specific. A lot of the time the patients are just a lot more comfortable with that. It's also important to kind of stipulate who can request a test. So can anyone kind of just say to your loved one, Billy, please, make sure you get tested this week? Or is there a family group where people can just say, hey, Billy, when last have you been tested? Let's get tested. What's that going to look like? The procedure, it is something that needs to be supervised. So it's not just a case of giving your loved one the cup and saying to them, go into the bathroom, do your thing, and bring the cup to me. You need to accompany your loved one into the bathroom. You need to see where the sample is coming from. So I think that's just something that people often don't do. So it's just important that that gets done. The next point there is the refusal of a test. In our opinion, and we often stipulate this in our contracts, is that a refusal of a test can safely be assumed that the person will test positive. If the person hasn't been using, there's absolutely no reason for them to refuse a test, right? Something else that you might want to include in your relapse prevention contract is, what about visitors or friends? If you are perhaps suspicious of their friends that are coming to visit and it is your home, would you like them to submit themselves for testing? And then the last one is, what do you do with those results? So if they do test positive, what is the consequence thereof? And there's a whole separate section for consequences, so we will discuss that. But the same for the visitors. So the visitors do test positive, or the visitors don't want to be tested. What is the consequence? Are they not allowed to visit? Are they not allowed to be friends? And I think that's quite important to discuss beforehand. Again, the reason why this is so important to discuss before the time is that when you're confronted with these situations, it doesn't have to be a heated argument. It's just simply, this is what we agreed upon. This is what we need to do. Thank you, Cheryl. Kato, I don't know if you have anything to add at this point.
No, I just think from the previous slide that just to reiterate that the communication is very important, so that it's not like a surprise and them trying to manipulate or trying to come up with defenses because you have spoken about it, something that they are aware of. So just also being able to identify if they are refusing, that it's actually a red flag.
Sure.
I want to add something. Testing your loved one is giving them extra support, because they can say when they're out, I can't drink, I will be tested. So even for your teenagers, it's a way for them to use you as a background for support and safety. And I can say, you know what, I can't smoke, mom will test me. So even for teenagers, it's actually protective.
100%. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Tia. Okay, so the next one is 5 pillars, and I know we've done separate presentations on the 5 pillars, so I'm not going to go into detail on what the 5 pillars mean. I just think it's important for you to have discussions with your loved one in terms of what are the 5 pillars practically going to look like for them once they leave treatment. So what are the minimum requirements going to be? Meetings, for instance, are they committing to doing 90 meetings in 90 days? Or are they committing to doing 5 meetings a week? And what is the ratio between face-to-face meetings versus online meetings? For us personally, or for me personally, I highly recommend 90 meetings in 90 days when your loved one first leaves treatment. If that is really, really not possible, which is really very seldom the case. Many people have done 90 meetings in 90 days, having really high demanding careers and families. But if it is really not possible, then I would say at least 4 meetings a week. which at least 2 of them are face-to-face meetings. And that to me is the absolute minimum. I almost want to say like 3 face-to-face meetings is the absolute minimum. Connection is vitally important when your loved one leaves treatment. So while they're in treatment, they are in a safe environment, in a therapeutic environment 24/7. When they leave, all of a sudden, that support is just gone. And finding that connection as soon as possible, it makes them feel again like, okay, wow, there are still people that understand. There's people that are going through the same thing as me. There's people that I can connect with on the same level. So yeah, meetings are just vitally, vitally important. I've just included some of the websites there. On the websites, you can find the details for the face-to-face meetings as well as the online meetings. I've included the ones there for NA, for CA, and for AA. But if you simply go onto Google and you just type in NA South Africa, it will give you the website. The other meetings that are often also used by the patients are the Gambling Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Game Addicts Anonymous, Eating Disorders Anonymous, and the codependency ones. I think those are the most important ones. I think that's it. Yeah. So again, just type it into your Google search and you will find it. We live in a time where information is at our fingertips. There are so many apps as well. So if you go into your Play Store or your Apple Store and you type in AA meetings, South Africa is going to give you various different apps where you can also find so much information. Sponsor, again, as well, how often do they need to meet with their sponsor and how soon after leaving treatment do they need to find a sponsor? For me, the minimum requirement is once a week they need to meet with their sponsor or speak to their sponsor, and they need to find a sponsor within the first week after leaving treatment. Again, that connection. Step work. Step work is something that they will be given by their sponsor and work through with their sponsor. But what does that look like? How much time a day or a week do they need to put aside for their step work, and what is the minimum requirement? Are we going to measure that in terms of pages, etc., etc.? Service position, again, how long after leaving treatment do they need to find one? My recommendation is within the first week. Higher power, what's that going to look like? And we've already spoken about the timeframes. Thank you, Cheryl. Routine. So when they are in treatment, whether it be, again, primary care, secondary care, halfway house, routine is so important. We have schedules that we adhere to, and we strongly encourage everyone who leaves to have a schedule. So part of that sustainable recovery strategy that I spoke about earlier, it has a little template where they can actually fill in their weekly schedule. When the patients leave, when the patients are in halfway house, they have a weekly schedule that they need to fill in every week, and they need to submit it to their halfway house manager. So it's important to have a plan, okay? Because if we don't have a plan, it's a plan to fail. So it's important to plan how are our 5 pillars fitting into this: work, studies, downtime, etc., etc. How all these different commitments in our life, how is it fitting into our weekly schedule? Where's my family fitting in? Where's my hobbies, my interests, my downtime, all of these things? How's it fitting into this? The other important thing that we need to consider is devices. I think for a lot of people in addiction, and not even just people in addiction to substances, but I think sometimes devices and social media can be addiction on its own. So we get so lost in that. But I think that's maybe something that we also need to have a look at. And there is a separate heading for that. But how much time is your loved one allowed on devices? And the same with television, right? And not just television, but again, they don't just watch Netflix on the television, they watch Netflix on their laptop, and they stream Netflix on their cell phones. So how much time in their day are they allowed to spend on the devices, whether it be television, cell phone, laptop, etc., etc.? So just again, routine. What is that going to look like? And what are some of the expectations that you have of them? What are some of the things that they have to do? So there is a separate heading about expectations around the house, but that also closely ties into routine, but I will expand a little bit more on that when we get to that heading. Thank you, Cheryl. Kato, I don't know if you want to add anything under routine.
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to add to reiterate the importance of it. Not only is it something concrete that they can look at so that it doesn't get overwhelming when they think about all the different things that they have to do, it also sort of gives them a guide, like when are they going to be doing what, so that there's no boredom or, triggers if they're just sitting at home thinking about, oh, maybe I can just go pick up a drink or use. So it sort of gives them a guide on what their days are going to look like, something concrete that they can look at, which is very important.
Sure. Okay, so the next one is finances. I keep saying this one's also really important. I think they all are so vitally important. So finances, firstly, I think it's important to establish whether your loved one is employed or unemployed. I think that, and again, this is where the whole personal and individualized concept comes in. So if they are employed, if they do have their own income, do their finances need to be monitored, and how is that going to be monitored? Is that going to be that SMS notifications get sent to you? Is it going to be that you have access to bank statements? Again, it's not about control. It's about being transparent and being accountable. Do they need to hand in receipts? It could also be about budget. So we need to have a budget. In addiction, I think there's no real value of money. The only value that money holds is how much can I buy in terms of alcohol or substances can I buy with this amount of money. So maybe they need to start budgeting. So how much goes towards the rent or, the loans, how much goes towards the car, how much goes towards insurance, how much goes towards groceries, how much goes towards kids' education, etc., etc., etc. Who's responsible for what payments? So that's if they are employed and they're getting their own income. If they are not employed, I think it's really important to establish what are you willing to pay for. So the recommendation that I often make is to pay for anything to do with their treatment. So if your loved one, for instance, is continuing with halfway house, aftercare, outpatient, living recovery, that's maybe a cost that you're willing to cover. Their medication, their psychiatric treatment, perhaps pay for their medical aid, those kind of things. And then again, if you're wanting to agree to a weekly allowance, again, I think it's important for them to have a budget, right? To say that I'm not getting my own income. So if I'm a smoker, I don't have to smoke the most expensive brand of cigarettes. And I don't have to go for sushi every night. It's important to teach them that value of money. And it's important then to also discuss what are the expectations in terms of finding work. Do you expect them to start looking for work now? Or is the plan for them to complete their studies or to start studying? And what's that going to look like? Is the expectation for them to perhaps have a part-time job like waitering or waitressing or being a coffee barista or something, and just somehow contribute to something, whether it even be just buying their own toiletries every month? But it's important to have that communication and to teach your loved one the importance of finances, the importance of budgeting, and the value of money. I think that is really, really important. The other thing for me that I often include in the relapse prevention contracts is that the patient shouldn't have any access to cash. I just think that cash is something that's quite dangerous. Cash is something that can't be tracked. Cash in the hand is something that is very, very tempting. Money in the account, tapping, swiping, it's very, very seldom these days that we need to have cash. So that's one of the things I try and avoid at all times. And the last one is that no spontaneous requests for money should be entertained. So if your loved one knows that, okay, they're starting a course now and they need to buy textbooks in a week's time and textbooks are going to cost them 2,000 Rand, they need to put that request in. Okay, so my budget is this amount, but I need 2,000 Rand for my textbooks. It needs to be planned in advance. It can't be the day before. Mom, Dad, I'm writing an exam tomorrow. I need this textbook. This textbook costs 2,000 Rand. You need to pay this money into my account. Mom and Dad are all of a sudden flustered. My child's going to fail. If I don't pay this money in, Mom and Dad are making spontaneous payments, and constantly that's just happening across the board the whole time. Nobody's keeping track. So again, in that case, sorry, you should have known about this in advance, and you should have put in this request in advance. So that's just another one that's quite important, is that no spontaneous request for finances should be entertained. Next one, please, Cheryl. Okay, transport. So just important to consider whether your loved one has access to their own vehicle and whether they're going to have access to that vehicle from the start. Does the vehicle have a tracking device, and are you able to log into that? Are you able to just see where they are? And again, it's not about controlling, it's not about watching their every move, but if you haven't heard from them for a period of time, just to be able to go onto the tracker and to say, okay, no, they are still at work, I can see the cars there. Or even to look at some of the apps like Life 360, for instance, where you can also track your loved one. Again, fuel costs. If your loved one is not working, who's going to be covering those fuel costs? And is there going to be a budget in terms of fuel costs? So not having endless money just to keep going up and down. And that also includes Uber costs. So that's fine. I will cover your Uber costs to get to and from outpatient or to get to and from meetings. But other than that, I'm not covering the Uber costs. So it's important to have those kind of agreements. Okay, next one, please. Okay, technology and social media, we did touch on it earlier. Again, the devices, whether that be laptops, iPads, cell phones, how much time is your loved one allowed to spend on it? But the other thing we also need to have a look at is the apps. So any apps that are not associated with the culture of recovery and that are not conducive to recovery needs to be removed from their devices. There's also, in a lot of cases, there are certain software that can be installed that blocks certain websites. For instance, there are ones for gambling and for porn and things like that. So if your loved one does struggle with that, you're welcome to speak to their counselors or their therapeutic team, and I'm sure they can assist you with some of that. The social media, again, I think that's something that's very personalized and very individual. I know for some people, social media in itself is part of their addiction. It is an addiction. And in some cases, I think that should be completely eliminated. In other situations, I think there's a lot of validation that we seek from that, and there's a lot of masking and things that we hide behind on social media. So how are we going to manage that? How are we going to control that? It's also about the people that we connect with, the contacts that we have on the social media, as well as on our phones. Another one that I really do like to include in the relapse prevention contract as well is that your loved one's phone needs to be charged, switched on, and answered at all times. I think a big thing about active addiction is that your loved one was just not reachable, often because they just chose not to be. It caused people to be panicked and to be concerned. Sometimes, like if they are in a meeting, they won't be able to answer, but then there needs to be an agreed upon time. Okay, so if you're not able to answer, once you see the missed call, you need to phone me within an hour after I've called you. Just to say, hi, sorry, I was just in a meeting, I'm okay. Just to check in, not just to completely disappear for a day or for 5-10 hours. And again, I don't think there should be any exceptions to that, really. That's that. Katsu, I don't know if you have anything under that one that you want to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that when you're speaking about all of these things, what comes up for me is the boundaries that need to be set. So you need to be willing to set boundaries. What you will accept, what you won't accept, and be assertive about it and clear about what what you are willing to accept or not accept.
Yeah, and I think that ties very much into this one. So also expectations around the home. Your loved one, what are the duties and the expectations? So in active addiction, it's so easy just to let things slide. Everything is in disarray. Our life, our house, our home. So often I have the wives of a loved one to say, please tell my husband that he needs to please make sure that the maintenance in the house is kept up to date, because that's just something that's fallen by the wayside. So if it is your child that will be living with you for a period of time, what are some of the duties and the chores that you're expecting? Do they need to cook dinner once a week? Do they need to do their own washing? Or, do they have the privilege of having somebody that does their washing for them? But what is their responsibility? Their dirty laundry needs to be put in the basket. Otherwise, it's not going to be done. Do they need to pack and unpack the dishwasher? Again, not isolating in the room the whole time. They need to be interacting with the family. What are your rules about visitors? People who drink or use, allowed, not allowed. Our recommendation will be anyone associated with the culture of addiction is not permitted. So it's really about, like Katya said earlier, about what are your boundaries, what are your bottom lines, what are you okay with and what are you not okay with. Again, it's also your home, and you have rights to set certain lines and expectations around your home. And I think it's very important to agree upon those things before your loved one leaves treatment or as they leave treatment. Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, and then the last one is consequences. And again, this is something that, we're really hoping it's not going to come to fruition, but it's something that needs to be discussed. And it needs to be discussed in terms of what happens when there's non-adherence to the boundaries and the bottom lines. So for instance, what do I do if my loved one isn't doing putting their laundry in the washing basket? Well, simply their laundry isn't going to be done. But what happens if my loved one isn't letting me know where they are? What happens if my loved one isn't answering their phone and not getting back to me within the hour? What is that consequence going to look like? Does that mean they don't get their allowance for a week? Does that mean that their device gets taken away? What are the consequences? What's that going to look like? And then also, worst case scenario, what happens if your loved one does pick up again? Do they return to treatment? What treatment do they return to? Do they return to Changes? Do they go to a different treatment center? Do they return on a court order? You can even stipulate minimum treatment length. So this time we're not just doing primary care, but you're also going to be doing extended treatment for a minimum period of 6 months, for instance. So it's just important to have these discussions. Again, when relapse does occur, it's such an overwhelming thing. Everyone is so overwhelmed. And when there's a plan in place, it's so easy just to go, you know what, this is what we discussed when we were all in a good, healthy space. We agreed that this is the best way forward. So let's execute this plan that we agreed upon. And then you can just simply execute that plan. Again, consequences is one of the more tricky ones. And like I said, it's the one that we hope we don't have to rely on and we don't have to fall back on, but it is important that we do include it in the relapse prevention.
Can I just add something quickly, Roxanne? So just in terms of consequences, like you mentioned, it is a hard one, but it's important to actually stick to the consequence that you've said. So actually be consistent with what you've said. Otherwise, this person might start to manipulate or know that this person won't actually follow through with what they've said. So it's important for you to actually stick by what you have said so that they know that this is real. This will actually happen.
Sure. 100%. Okay, the next one, Cheryl, I think that's the last slide, if I'm not mistaken. There we go. So yeah, when it comes to relapse prevention and when it comes to the boundaries and bottom lines, there's so much to discuss and there's so much to cover. But those are just some of the really important ones and some of the basic ones. So I'm not sure if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask, or if anyone maybe has some personal experience that they'd like to share with us.
So there is something on the chat. Trevor said our loved one's vehicle has a tracking device, and my name with his name on it, and he's in full control of when the loved one leaves on his own. So emails come to him and he checks on the tracking. So that's something that he's implemented and put in place.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Trevor. Cheryl, I'm not sure if there's anything that you want to add.
No, I don't think so. I think you ladies have covered quite a lot. I'm sure there's probably loads of questions, and I would really encourage our guests to ask them, because I'm sure you brought up a lot for everybody. You know, I think relapse is one of our greatest fears. And as much as we'll say, no, he's on his own, she must get on with it, and it's deep down, it's there. And I think
Yeah.
if we don't talk about it and don't inform ourselves and get that knowledge and insight and information, it comes from nowhere, and we fight with them. We get so angry when they relapse.
Yeah. No, very, very true. And like you said, I think it's everyone's biggest fear. And even the patients, so often the patients in here, they are fearful of it. They don't want to return to that. So and again, for me, these rules aren't about control. It's not about controlling. It's about being accountable. It's about being transparent. It's in the beginning, I spoke about living a different life to addiction. And addiction is a lot about being in the dark, everything being clandestine. And recovery is the opposite of that. Recovery is about being open, being honest. There's nothing to hide. If you want to look in my business, sure, have a look. It's all above board. So
I think the proverbial is what you said, that fine line between control and accountability. Because I think we do tend to want to control them.
yeah.
And, you know, it's all good and well to take this presentation and try and internalize it. But if we haven't done some of the work on us, on ourselves, we
Yeah.
will control. We love the fact that we can track them and, you know, smell their clothes and check their eyes every time they come home. And I don't believe that causes a relapse, but I think it makes it much easier to relapse, because addicts don't like to be told what to do. So it's about taking this information, internalizing, and figuring out what's the best way that I can help my loved one when he or she's in relapse, process, and what is an effective relapse prevention.
Sure. And I think that ties nicely into the question that's just come into the chat room. So, how do you distinguish between being controlling, being aware of codependency, and supporting the addict, but protecting yourself too? So, I think it's a great question. And Cheryl, I don't know if you want to go first or if you want me to do it first.
I'm happy to. I think I think the answer for me is it depends on where you're at in your own process of codependency and or enabling. Because if we're still operating with fear, ruled by terror, have these questions in our head that we haven't had answered yet, we still believe they're weak, still believe it's because they're not going to spiritual services, if we still believe that they don't need medication to stabilize, then we're still in codependent mode. And I think when you'll know when you wake up with fears, when you up late at night, you avoiding work, you avoid certain situations, social, then you haven't done enough work on yourself. And I think that's when we tend to control. We control for us. And we manipulate ourselves to think that we doing it to help them stay clean. But believe it or not, they've got loads of support. Anybody who's walked into Narcotics Anonymous meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, will tell you there's 60 to 80 people there to support each other. Our loved ones don't need that from us. What they need is those boundaries, it's the parameters, and it's about us getting better for ourselves. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
No, I agree with you 100%. I do think that control often comes from, and the codependency comes from a place of fear. And that's got to do with our insecurities. So I think you answered it really, really well.
And we can understand it, right? Because these people, our loved ones, our children, brothers, sisters, families, they're not drinking water to hydrate. They're taking drugs that poison themselves, ruin their bodies, ruin their brains, and can lead to death. So we feel quite justifiable to protect them from this disease and their addiction and their consequences. And I think that place of coming to terms with, I can't protect them from the addiction, but I can instill the consequences because that will help. That's when our codependency is starting to ebb. And we're not covering up and fixing up and making excuses for, but we're actually becoming accepting. I like to use, a friend of mine 3 decades ago told me this, and he was just fresh in AA. And he said to me, we should call it AAA. The first one is admit. The second one is accept. And the third A is act to change. And I think when we've gotten to that third A, the acting to change part, we should have worked through a lot of our fears. I don't think we can ever take those away. Our loved ones, if they don't stop using, can die. It's real. It's not a fear, it's real. But I think as family members, one day we wake up and think, oh my goodness, they can die. And that's just because our denial has been dismantled. So it's about family support group. It's about going to 12-step meetings. It's about keeping a journal, talking to other families, researching. As you said earlier, we are in a day and age where we have so much information. When I started in the 80s, I was actually unpacking boxes, and I found every brochure of every talk I ever went to, of every Sanka professional, Dr. de Miranda, Del Searle, people that were the only people who were talking about it in the 80s. Now, on a click of our cell phone, we can get hold of 3 million pages in 10 seconds. We should be capitalizing on that. We should be embracing the knowledge that's available to us, because I think that helps us.
100%.
I think so many times we put our loved ones into rehabs, expecting the rehabs to do the work. Then we expect the loved one, the addict, to do the work, and we're just tired. I didn't want to do work. I got told, please join a family support group. I'm like, that's the last thing I'm going to do. I'm exhausted. I've lived for 5 years of chaos and trauma and hell. I don't want to hear about drugs. Fix him, sort him out, tell me when I can pick him up. I'm doing nothing. Here I sit 30 years later.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Cheryl. I agree.
The knowledge is the power. I get very excited when I see that there's 30 people on family support group, because that means 30 people are working on themselves.
Yeah, that is great to see. So, Cheryl, there's just another question that's coming. I'm just aware of the time, and maybe it's one that you or Dr. Tia can answer for us. ADHD medication has been part of substance use. Are there any ADHD medications that don't have addictive properties, etc.?
Definitely. The actually non-stimulant ADHD medication has no addictive properties and is probably the number one that you should give an addiction. There's also a couple of others that is stimulant medication that's also a little bit addictive proof. Because for the addiction, you have to take the Ritalin, and that gives you the high. But if the Ritalin is in sugar crystals, so it doesn't matter if you snarf it, it doesn't matter what you do with it, it only dissolves over 12 hours. That's also a little bit addiction. But you first try the non-addictive. There's, and the non-stimulants, there's at least 4 or 5 that you can try before you even have to touch Ritalin or Concerta. But with the Ritalins, you need to use Contramol. Contramol is the methylphenidate in a sugar crystal, and it takes X amount of time to dissolve. So you can't get a high on it. You can't push it to get it big. You can't crush it and think you're going to get a high on it. You can't. There's also one of the amphetamines, Vyvanse, that's binded to a amino acid, and that amino acid takes time to actually dissolve. But first, the new research says the non-stimulant medication like atomoxetine, Strattera, those are actually better than the stimulants. We just used to give them too small a dose.